About 8 months ago, we had an awful car accident. 2 young men were in a car driving, and a stolen motorcycle, driven by the motorcycle driver along with his nephew, crashed into their car as they were parking. This young man came out with his nephew and began shouting at the 2 young people in the car. The young people started shouting back. The young people were from Jerusalem. The motorcycle driver and his nephew were from one of the Bethlehem rural areas.
Hello and welcome to the Vengeance and Reconciliation podcast. I'm your host, Josiah Shaver. This is part 1 of a 2-part interview with Tarek Al-Zoughbi. This part 1, he dives into a lot, including kind of an explanation of the organization he is with, WIAM. WIAM is the Palestinian Conflict Transformation Center based in Bethlehem, the West Bank, Israel, Palestine. It's a really rich discussion. He talks about how WIAM operates and even gets into some really riveting discussions and stories of how he's seen conflict transformed. It's good stuff, and I hope you enjoy it. I decided to make this whole interview free and not charge for part of it on Patreon. Last thing I'll say before we jump in is that this was recorded in July 2025, and while a lot has changed since then in this volatile part of the world, the lessons, the stories, and his advice and perspective are still incredibly rich and definitely relevant for the ongoing situation. Let's jump in.
I'll just close that closest window. Maybe it'll reduce the noise a bit. This is the best it's gonna get. So we'll hope there'll be no trucks honking or trucks selling food on the loudspeaker.
Yeah, dude, those are... You really hear those when they go by.
Yes, you do. Good sales, right?
I wonder if it helps. I don't know. I've been wondering that. Okay. Hey folks, and welcome back to Vengeance and Reconciliation. I'm really excited for this one. We're recording on July 21st, 2025. Not sure exactly when this one's going to get published, but just wanted to give that date. And I have with me Tarek Al-Zoughbi, and I hope I'm saying your last name right. How would you pronounce it?
Well, in Arabic we have the ghin, which of course isn't part of the English alphabet, so it would be Al-Zoughbi.
Wow.
But the important part is to emphasize the G in English. So Zoughbi.
Zoughbi.
Yeah. Otherwise you get too close to other words in Arabic.
All right. Gotcha. Yeah, I've tried to say your last name a few times, and I don't feel like I get it right either. But I appreciate you making time to be on the show. I'm really excited, and to be honest, I don't feel like I know you well enough to introduce you very well myself. So I would like to just ask you a little bit about who you are and what you do to start.
Yeah.
Maybe you could start with where you grew up.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you for this opportunity. I think it's a pleasure to be having this conversation and to be welcoming you here. So where I grew up is mostly in Bethlehem, Palestine. So first, a small introduction about myself. My name is Tarek Al-Zoughbi, as you know. I am an American Palestinian or a Palestinian American, depending on the day. And I belong to a Christian family here in Bethlehem. And I was the only one of my siblings to be born outside of Palestine, Israel. I was born in the States, South Bend, Indiana, for political reasons. I have an older sister, and when my American mother gave birth to her, she gave birth to her in Jerusalem. And on the day of her delivery, my father was unable to access the hospital legally, even though he had legal permission to do so. So after that experience, my mother decided I'm not going through that again. And then she had me in the States, and then when it came to my younger 2 brothers, there was a really good hospital here for child delivery, the French hospital here in Bethlehem. And so they were born here, my sister in Jerusalem, and myself in the States, but we all grew up here in Bethlehem.
Wow. Okay. And have you lived here since then? Or, well, let me just say, I know you have about a gazillion degrees. So I'd love to hear about those as well.
Yeah, so I should say I'm 31 years old. And out of my 31 years of life, I've lived here maybe for 24, 25 of them.
Okay.
So I have my first master's in international cooperation and development from Bethlehem University here. I got my second master's in finance from Case Western Reserve University in Ohio. I got my third master's in conflict analysis and Mediterranean security from the University of Malta. My fourth master's from George Mason University in conflict analysis and resolution. And then I'm currently working on my fifth master's at Michigan State University in education.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Oh, thank you. I enjoy studying.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Or learning, I should say.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to hear a little bit about WIAM, which is, as I understand it, a conflict transformation center here in Palestine, West Bank, Bethlehem, where we are today. Is it your dad that started it?
It is. So WIAM, first of all, is an Arabic word that loosely translates to agape, to harmonious relations, to cordial relations. It's a very beautiful word in Arabic, and it's what we aspire for between us and within community in our relationships. And it started in 1994. My father is the founder and director of it. And they began with conflict mediation based in Western styles, but especially in the Arab-Palestinian tradition of Sulh. And then as they continued working, they found that there were certain conflict themes or similar types of conflicts that were repeating. And so they wanted to go from being reactive, where there was conflict, to mediating it, to being proactive. How can we limit the rise of conflict? And so one of the conflicts that was reoccurring had to do with women's rights, whether it was inheritance rights, because depending on the culture, depending on the family, a woman might not inherit at all, or if she does inherit, she might not inherit her full share as one of the children. And so there's a lot of conflict that arises from that. And so we established the Women Empowerment Project or program, where we focus on social, economic, and political empowerment. Understanding that without the economic aspect or dimension of this empowerment, then the true actionable empowerment is limited to the sovereignty, to the ideology of the closest male patriarch or whoever is paying the bills and paying for the lives of these women and girls. So understanding that economic empowerment is a very important dimension of empowerment and the expression of sovereignty and the right to self-determination. We also focus on youth. We're a very young society here in Palestine. 70% of our youth or of our people are under the age of 30. Very different than the States or many European and Western nations. And so it's a very passionate society. It's a very passionate community. And that also means that conflict can arise very easily. And so part of this empowerment for both peoples or demographics is creating these safe spaces where we can talk about the salient issues to each group. But the other part of this is also talking about identity and talking about actionalizing our agency. Yes, we cannot control what happens on the political level. We even can't control what happens on the national level. But we have a lot of power when it comes to controlling what happens on the societal level. Can we begin building, while we're waiting for justice, while we're waiting for a positive peace, while we're waiting for true negotiations, that'll lead to these things to happen, to take place, can we begin building the society that we wish to live in? When we talk about women's roles in our societies used to be much more present and much more welcome in the 40s and in the 60s as a reaction and as a result of all these other items that we cannot control, especially this desire for self-determination. It kind of festers and it becomes part of this oppressive cycle that we live. We cannot control things on the national level, but we can control them on the local level. Men controlling women controlling children hitting the neighborhood dog or neighborhood animal, that animal going back and biting the man, and it becomes this cycle of violence. And so part of this is not just saying, let us disrupt this cycle, it's also saying, what society do we wish to live in? And so working towards gender justice, working toward gender equity, making sure that we're living in partnership with each other. And so the last two main programs that we have are children and our citizen diplomacy. Where we're sitting right now, in 2016, a Stanford study found that this was the world's most gassed area. We haven't seen a lot of protests this year because we have learned effectively from what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the north of the West Bank, what's happening in Hebron. But in the past, this used to be one of the main hot areas and hot spots in Palestine, Israel, where there would be frequent violence. There'd be protests and then it would be answered with violence. And so when we talk about the communities around us, we're talking about a high level of trauma. In the West, we oftentimes talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. Here we call it continuous traumatic stress disorder, because the trauma is still being accumulated. And that means our focus can't be as much on trauma healing, because that's a post. I've accumulated my trauma and now it's time to begin healing, to begin, living, to begin sealing these wounds. Here the wounds are still open and they're festering. And so we talk about trauma coping instead. How do we make sure that our children especially, but that our people are able to lead lives that aren't characterized by the trauma that they've accumulated, but instead by their aspirations, by their dreams, and by their work. And so with our children, we also create a safe space. We focus on peer mediation because we learn from the macro conflict, and we bring that macro conflict and the tools employed in it to the micro level. I see on the macro level that whoever has the strongest coercive violence, whoever has the strongest monopoly of violence can have their way. So maybe if I want to have my way on this very interpersonal level, on this familial level, on the societal level, then I must have the highest or strongest monopoly over violence. And so we say we need to disrupt that as well. We need to understand it as unjust and part of oppression and injustice on the macro level, and we must also understand it as unjust and not right on the micro level. And so we focus on peer mediation with our children, making sure that while they're young, we're also instilling this understanding. We're instilling that there is a way to get over conflict in a way that isn't violent, that allows us to see the dignity and worth of the individual in front of us, to see God's image, and gives us the best chance towards a win-win solution where both our interests are met, both our interests are taken into consideration. And then the final program is the citizen diplomacy program. This is where we welcome internationals, visitors, where we welcome the locals, where we welcome other brothers, sisters, and siblings, and we speak about conflict transformation. We speak about restorative justice. We speak about conflict mediation, and we also speak about our lives and what it's like to live under occupation, both as a Palestinian Muslim, and a Palestinian Christian.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that I want to ask you about.
Yes.
This is awesome. This is a really great introduction. I did want to say, just because you mentioned the study that showed this is one of the most was it the most tear gas place in the world on the planet?
That's what the study said.
Yeah.
In 2016, I said Stanford, but it was actually Berkeley.
Gotcha.
So I apologize about that.
You're good. Well, with that, a couple things. Weeks after, so I'm just down the street at Bethlehem Bible College, and this is just like 2 blocks down the road for folks listening. And I was picking up some trash on the campus of the Bible College, which is right by the street, which I've heard from you and others that the Israeli military has often come in and shot many tear gas canisters. So in this trash, which is just down, so it's slightly lower in elevation, so there's often trash that will blow in there or fall down there. And I found it was actually probably from months ago, but still there, a tear gas canister. The other thing I want to say about that, because this was just so meaningful to me, and you probably know about this, but we're right next to Haida refugee camp. And in that camp, there's this incredible shop where they create artwork and jewelry from the metal of these tear gas canisters. And I love that because it's, beauty from ashes. But the other crazy thing about this, and I heard this from the owner, is that the Saturday, and wow, this gets into a lot, but he told me, and I've heard from other sources as well, that a lot of these tear gas canisters are manufactured in the U.S. and sent over with U.S. taxpayer. Yeah, with my tax dollars as an American taxpayer. That gets into a lot of complicated politics and stuff, but I just wanted to say that as part of the context. And I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to jump off of.
Yeah, I do, and I do apologize to those watching and to you that this might seem like a tangent. But no, you are absolutely right. The sad and unfortunate reality is myself as a Palestinian American, I'm paying for my own suffering, right? But the other part is that we are deeply complicit in the states. When it comes to the tear gas, it's produced in Pennsylvania. We have quite a few other corporations that are somehow directly involved in the technologies or weaponry that is used against Palestinians, against Lebanese, against Yemenis, against Syrians, against Iranians, against anyone who is targeted not by the US directly, but instead through Israel using US funds, using US technologies, and using US weaponry. And to many Americans, this may come as a shock. And many people, when they hear this, they ask, well, how can we get involved? How can we do better? And I think there are 2 parts to this answer. The first is that we must pressure our own government to do better. Let us not abide by or support or continue to promote a foreign policy that is effective because of the hard power that it yields, but let us instead support and promote soft power. Let us promote the US involvement in helping, in providing aid, in providing social programming, not as we see and deem fit, but instead as our local partners and as our international partners tell us is needed. And I think that's one part. Let us advocate for change. I think there are many in the States who say, we have to protect Israel. We must stand by Israel. We must support Israel. And I say, okay, then let's do that. We do not support Israel by allowing Israel to perpetuate genocide. We do not support Israel by dirtying its name and allowing its actions to dirty its name as it has. If we want to support Israel, we must understand that the best security, the most sustainable, the most effective security that Israel will ever have comes with peace with its neighbors and a positive peace.
Yeah.
And so if we wish to continue supporting Israel, let's make sure that we're asking Israel, 1, to abide by international law, to abide by humanitarian law and to make sure that every individual in any region that it is in some relationship with, whether that relationship be occupation, genocide, whatever it may be, that in that relationship they are prioritizing and protecting the rights of all individuals, Israelis and other individuals. The second part of this is that we in the US must take a very honest and hard look at our own community, at our own society. I think, with the current presidency, with everything that has happened as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as it relates to changing measures and making sure that race and sex are not part of the conversation, while we still have people who continue to lead lives that are different than our own because of their race and sex. It's important that we recognize these differences. It's important that we recognize these structures which effectively hurt various communities. And I think I can say to my own family in the States, I come from a white Christian background, American, ancestry in Germany, and these conversations are very difficult. And sometimes they're difficult because my family believes that if we speak truth to these realities, that we somehow have to pay the price of it, that we lose power, that now we have to pay reparations till our 12th grandchild or future generation of grandchildren. But the reality is, until a person in the States, until every person in the States counts, we cannot expect the US to be a partner of peace here. When we talk about the simple reality of enslavement and that history in the US, and then we look at the 13th Amendment, which states that slavery and servitude is abolished except for criminals, then slavery hasn't been abolished. It's just changed form. And then when we look at the percentage of every demographic and population and those incarcerated from it, then we also see a skewed image, a skewed reality. And so as a practitioner of conflict transformation and conflict mediation, I think one of the greatest things I have learned is about the generosity of the human spirit. When I have two conflicting parties, and one of them has been deeply wronged to the extent where, I'll give you a real life case. About 8 months ago, we had an awful car accident. Two young men were in a car driving, and a stolen motorcycle, driven by the motorcycle driver along with his nephew, crashed into their car as they were parking. This young man came out with his nephew and began shouting at the two young people in the car. The young people started shouting back. The young people were from Jerusalem. The motorcycle driver and his nephew were from one of the Bethlehem rural areas. But he was closer to his family. And so all of a sudden you had 15 men from his family come and attack these two young men. One of them ended up in the hospital with a punctured lung, and the other one needed quite a few stitches and was quite bloodied up, and they were both shaken, right? We speak to the families of both families. The man with his nephew and 15 members all denied that they did anything. The two young men said, "We want revenge. We want their blood, or if we don't get their blood, we want everything that they're worth. We want their cars, we want their houses. We want whatever we can get from them. We basically want to bleed them dry." So we practiced shuttle diplomacy, listening to this side, listening to that side. We went back and forth until we were able to bring them together. The two young men and their family were still out for their blood. They almost killed my son. Over what? I've raised this son for 22 years and he's just gonna go just like that. Luckily he survived, but we wanna make sure that they can never do this again. So we brought them here. This was before we had this building. And when we bring them together, you have three parties involved. You have the two conflicting parties, and then you have the team of mediators. Sometimes it'll be you have both conflicting parties with speakers and no mediators. The mediators are part of the speakers for the family, depending on which conflict method we're using. After they were welcomed here by my father, by the director of the center, and we told them that we hope this will be a gathering of peace, we employed readings from the Bible, readings from the Quran, because one family was Muslim, one family was Christian. We employed cultural texts or cultural stories, and then we gave them the floor. Usually, we give the oppressor or the one who committed the most wrong the chance to speak first. And so when their tribal elders spoke, they said, "Our children did something awful to you and to your children. They did something that we ourselves cannot accept, and that was violent, and that was awful. And the important part," he said, "and our necks are yours to do with as you please." There is a complete surrender in this truth-telling, saying, we have done the wrong, and we will now pay the consequences. We will be accountable. Now it's time for the other family to speak. This family that I have heard speak every day about how they wish for blood and they wish to take everything from the other side. Their tribal elder spoke, and he said, "Thank you. This is all we wanted to hear. Now, we might just ask that you help with the costs of the hospital bills and the car repairs. We would rather keep and build a friendly relationship with you all so that our children know each other and so that they may protect each other in the future." All of this hate and anger that they had completely melted away. There is so much power in recognizing the ill that has been committed against someone else, the injustice, especially if it is done by me or by the system that advantages me. And there is so much generosity that can come out of that. I think, I brought up enslavement and slavery in the US. I did not bring up indigenous people and the history of suffering that they've endured. And in some of my visits and travels across the US and Canada, Turtle Island, I was able to speak to some indigenous groups. And there's just this same strong, powerful, God-inspired maybe, I don't know what to call it, because my mind cannot fully understand it, generosity and generous spirit that comes out. I was just in Canada a few months ago for the People's Forum, a gathering to kind of mobilize around the G7 gathering that was there and to try and push, pressure, and lobby for some much needed change in these groups. And one of the indigenous elders and I were speaking, and I said, "So what about here? What's the answer?" And he says to me, "We indigenous people, we have a lovely and long relationship with the land. We recognize it as a living being. And what we simply ask is that this recognition also be carried forth to all visitors. That they respect and treat the land, not pollute it, that they treat and respect the land like we did, and that they live in harmony and connection and relationship to the land. Not as owners of the land who may abuse the land, who may sell the land, who may exploit the land, but instead as people in relationship with this living land that also needs nurturing just as it nurtures us." There is a deep generosity there, and there's also a call to action. I told you it was going to be a tangent, but the tangent is now over.
Okay, that was so rich. I love it.
Thank you.
Wow. I've heard it before in just learning about conflict resolution that it does so much just to recognize, to say, look, I did this was wrong. And yeah, it's wild because sometimes that is the biggest thing that the person who is wrong needs to hear. I definitely want to hear more stories. I want to ask you more about let me see, of course. The peer mediation with the kids. So is this what I pictured, and then you can correct me, is like, is this like practicing mock scenarios where there's a mediator and there's two kids and they practice talking it through together, or how does that look?
Yeah, it's different depending on the age level. So the peer mediation program is for children up to summer camp, which can be as young as 5 years old. And then we also work with high schools and schools, and we also work with our youth and different universities and colleges. So at every level, it's going to look a little bit different. The basic level is kind of talking about how violence is ineffective. It doesn't help us. It doesn't help build this relationship. And also saying, like, is there a way that I can vent my frustration? You have this toy at this very young age, and I would like to play with this toy, but you're playing with the toy. Can I come and talk with you instead of taking it from you? Well, yes, what if you say no? Well, then maybe I can say, okay, well, I would love to play with the toy, and I know that the toy is yours. Is there a way maybe you'll be bored after an hour? Maybe I can give you the ball that I'm playing with? Part of it is talking about these different communication skills and styles that are available to us even at a young age. Then as they get older, sometimes we bring the parents into it. I really want to watch this football game. I really want to play this video game. I really want to see my friends. I really want this toy, but my parent says no. Do I react to that? And how do I react to that? Can I speak with my parents? Right? And it's part of this, as they grow older, is also directly making sure explicitly that we're saying that yes isn't the only answer that comes out of conflict mediation resolution. I can still accept that no from my parent, but maybe there's a conversation that happens around it. My child, maybe we don't have enough money this month, but I would love to try and save up to afford this for you. Maybe there's more violence in the area, and so I'm worried about your safety. Being able to communicate in a way that I understand that my interests are not ignored, but instead that the answer, the reaction from the other part has an explanation. There is a reason that I'm receiving this no answer. It isn't just because they don't want to see me happy, or they don't want to see me having what I really want. As we get into high school, we begin to talk about different conflict styles. We begin to talk about competitive, we begin accommodating, avoiding, collaborative, compromising. And within these different conflict styles, it's also to show that they're all useful. Competitive is one of the easy ones, also known as aggressive. Oftentimes students are saying, no, that's not a good conflict style, we should never have it, right? But how often do we use it in our lives? But we also say, well, what about if there's a fire? Are you going to negotiate with the fire? Because that's a conflict, right? So sometimes there is this competitive or aggressive conflict style that is needed. What about violence? That's where we begin to expand this topic. And one of the things we ask is, how can we justify our own violence without justifying others? I am committing violence against you today because you are a blasphemer. I'm committing violence against you today because you have stolen from me. I am committing violence against you today because we create a rule that others can use and justify their own violence. And so at the end of the day, what we have is systems that allow and support and promote violence within the system, this logical system. And so instead we talk about nonviolence, and we talk about communication. We talk about conflict not as something that is scary, but instead as an opportunity. In the example that I gave before, those two families did not know each other. Jerusalem and the villages of Bethlehem, through this conflict transformation, even though it came because of awful circumstances, now they know each other. Now they can recognize each other in the streets. Now, if anything happens, maybe they can go and help each other. right? If they're in the same area or something. We also talk about it as an opportunity to deepen, not just grow or establish, but also deepen our relationships and our understandings. When we're able to perform conflict transformation mediation within the family, we create stronger bonds. And this is the same in society. Going back to what we were speaking about before, injustice and structural violence and injustice. When we are able to work through that, recognizing the violence that has been committed, recognizing the pain that has been endured, we are also recognizing that it is not something that we desire as both aggressor and victim when it's clearly delineated. And so it also gives us a chance to not come together and be simply divided by the realities of our life. I'm a white man who is a US citizen. The person in front of me is not. Maybe they're one of the people that's being targeted by any administration, right? And so there is going to be that distance. That distance can be bridged, maybe interpersonally, but socially, that distance is there. And interpersonally, we can also argue and talk about how small we can make that gap. Because the realities, our lived experiences are so foreign. We may have similar lived experiences. We both go to school, we both try and provide for a good life. But when I see the police, I do not hide and duck. Maybe as soon as they see the police, they feel threatened. Regardless of whether that police officer is the sweetest guy or whether there's someone who has a vendetta and belongs to the Proud Boys or whatever it may be. They are in a position where they have the power over both of us, but I'm not in the position of fearing them in the same way that they are. And so in being able to speak about this and recognize this, and this also includes those who, let's say, would support, uplift, or do the work of the system, it allows us to engage in a very different and real way, where we are coming closer to being the images of God that we were created and not the socially constructed and structurally divided people that we are. And so, going back, high school, when we get to college now, we're able to talk and we're able to expand our operation. You know, we're able to talk about the different strategies. We're able to talk about how the different communication styles that we employ. We're able to look at age differences, sex differences. We're able to talk about power and positionality, right? Because part of this is when we talk about conflict transformation based in the Arab Sulha tradition, oftentimes women do not have an active role in it because of the patriarchal structures here. And so you may have let's say there's a woman here that has been wronged. You are part of her family. She might not have a voice here at the table, right? And so will you adequately speak truth to her experience? And shouldn't she have a say in how things unfold, right? And so part of this is also saying, maybe we are in the conflict, we must also recognize that there are different topics which place us in different vulnerabilities. When we talk about honor, when we talk about sex and sexual expression, these are things which will make women and girls a lot more vulnerable than they do males or men and boys. And so we are able to begin bringing in this awareness at the high school level, but we're able to fully expand on it in colleges and with our youth programs and with our youth. And so we go back and we talk about the iceberg. I don't know if you know where there is what is spoken, what is said, the positions, but there are all these interests that are behind them. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a very actionable way, but it becomes a very effective and empowering tool to be able to move beyond our positions into our interests. We cannot negotiate our positions, but we can oftentimes find ways bringing both our interests into the conversation and trying to meet the needs within those interests.
Yeah.
And so this is the main program, and then we also have this internship program where we bring in youth who are interested in conflict transformation, conflict mediation, including women youth. They're usually over the age of 18. And we're able to begin giving them this experience because there are some barriers to being a conflict mediator here. You have to have a good reputation, you have to be of a certain age, and you usually have to be a man or male. But we find women to be much more effective and empowering as mediators when it comes to very sensitive conflict mediation and interpersonal mediation. When it comes to large-scale community or societal or large familial conflict mediation, it just depends on the family and the community. Some will not accept a woman's voice within these mediations. Some are a bit more open to it. And so, but what we find is by making sure that women are present and part of the process of conflict mediation, especially on the micro level, then we're already building what we need to make sure that it'll be possible for them to participate on the macro level and the micro level, the familial, the community conflict mediations.
Wow. Okay, I would love to hear more of the process when there's a group that comes to you guys to Leon. I say it right?
Yep.
Leon.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. When they come and they're like, hey, we have this conflict, is it usually both of them are coming and they say, hey, help us resolve, or is sometimes one party saying, hey?
Or no parties.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so before I say that, I should say that we are a community-based culture. We belong to families, and our families are usually a lot larger than they are in the West. Family here can mean tribe. It can simply be the family name, depending on the family group. So I come from the Zoughbi family, but I belong to the Farahiyya tribe, and we number a few thousand. And so, depending on the conflict, if it's someone from outside of my tribe who's really done something against me that's quite violent and quite bad, then it might be my whole tribe that's involved in this conflict. So a conflict between two people, or an event between two people, might end up being a conflict between a couple hundred to a couple thousand people.
Wow.
And so who comes to us, or how are we involved? It's different every time. Sometimes it's one of the conflicting parties. Sometimes it's one of the conflicting parties' friends or neighbors. We've had phone calls from the police asking us to intervene. We've had phone calls from the person who's committed the aggression. We've had phone calls from the person who had the aggression committed against them. We've also had phone calls from their parents, from their brothers and sisters, from their families. We've also had it from institutions that are aware of this or know about them. We've also had it from people who just saw the conflict happening and were walking by but don't know the details.
Wow.
And so then, depending on who invited us or asked us to intervene, we begin exploring. So I find that the conflict is between these two people and we weren't invited by either of them, right? Maybe we'll pick up the phone, call one of them, maybe we'll pay a visit and we'll say, hey, we heard this happened, would you like our support or our help? Sometimes it's a very enthusiastic yes, sometimes it's a no, and oftentimes it's everything in between. And then what we usually do, if it's only one party that has said yes to us or that has invited us, then we have to begin talking with the second party. And we cannot go as strangers to the second party. If there isn't already a relationship established between us and the second party that we haven't been directly in contact with, or that we're not directly connected to, then we have to search for a mediator. And so this is a person who may be the far cousin or neighbor of one of the groups and we'll say, hey, we're interested in speaking to this group, would you join us? And that way, if they're a trusted person and they believe we're a trusted person or people or group, then they can facilitate this conversation, the opening of it. And then we go, we introduce ourselves, we speak about who we are, and then we try and begin the shuttle diplomacy, where we're going from conflict party A to conflict party B, sometimes conflict party C, and we're trying to hear all these perspectives to get a more holistic understanding of the conflict. There's also this interpersonal conflict, or the micro conflict, where sometimes, I'll give you an example, we had a woman coming here who was being abused by her husband, domestic abuse, right? Violence is on the rise as the socioeconomic political situation deteriorates, things get worse. Without healthy expression and outlet and without conscious action, it can manifest into violence on all levels. And so she says, I've been married to him for, I think it was 7 years. We have 3 beautiful children together. And the first years were heaven, but now it's really, really bad. And I know my husband's a good man, but I just can't keep enduring this. I want your help. Okay, we will help you. But you cannot tell my husband that came and spoke with you. So now we're supposed to mediate a conflict that we do not know about. And so, we have to be creative, we have to be resourceful. In our society, hospitality is a very important component, and it's a big thing. So we find out where they live, and we decide that we have a plan. We go and knock on their house, the husband opens the door. We're looking for so-and-so, we believe they live in this neighborhood. The husband says, I know exactly who you're looking for, but before I show you, you have to come in and drink coffee. We have our foot in the door. So now we're able to go in. Of course, the husband is curious if he's never met us before. So what are you doing here? Why are you looking for this person? When we are able to be honest, we're honest. When we have to tell some white lies, sometimes we do. Well, we're looking for this person because we're hoping that they'll be an intermediary between us and these 2 conflicting families so that we can solve this conflict. Okay, what's the conflict about? Well, the man and the wife, they're having some problems, or some, unfortunately, domestic abuse, some violence that the woman and her children are enduring. And we're hoping that we'll be able to help them see what's going on and maybe meet the man's needs, but especially meet the woman's needs and the children's needs to make sure that they're protected from harm, that no more violence, that they're not subjected to any more violence, but also to see what's going on with the man. Hearing this, he says, maybe he can help us. He calls for his wife. His wife comes and she's extremely frightened, having, seeing all of our faces there in her room without announcing herself, without giving her prior warning. And she sits down, he says, they're here to do this and this and this. Why don't you tell them about our problems? We interrupt her because we believe when you tell a story for the second time, especially in high tense, high pressure, anxiety-ridden situations, you may make a mistake. He hits me as I told you. Oh, oops. Right. So we say, well, you're the man of the house playing on this patriarchy. Why don't we hear from you first? This man begins to say, 4 years ago, I had a really good paying job in Jerusalem. I worked there for almost 10 years. I was going across the checkpoint every day. I was making my money. I was able to buy clothes, buy food. I was able to pay for the groceries, for the school bills. I was able to afford my family a good life. And then around 3.5, 4 years ago, I lost my job because I lost my permit. I couldn't go. I tried for a few months to go illegally. The last time I got caught, I found out I couldn't do it anymore. anymore. It was just no way. The employers became a bit worried, and so they terminated me. And I haven't been able to find anything here. And so the stress is increasing, the bills keep rising, the needs of the family, and my fuse has become a lot shorter. And so I've hit my wife, sometimes my kids, and I'm just not sure how we're going to survive. Right? There's the submission. There's also the change in his body. He can't look at us while he's saying what he's done to his wife and kids. He looks down. He also uses very simple and plain language. He doesn't go into the details of it. And we say, well, thank you. Violence is never the answer, and the violence that is committed is not helping your situation. It's not helping you find a job. It's not helping you pay any bills. It's likely creating a very unhealthy atmosphere at home. But we thank you for sharing this with us. You, ma'am, do you have anything to add? Right? We've heard him, now it's her turn. Now she can speak without worry. Because the other part is we don't want her to share details that he wouldn't want. And then he would become on the defensive and violent once we're gone. A smile in front of us, a stick once we're gone. Right? And so she says, yeah, I also want to add that my husband's a really good man. Right? This generous spirit again. And so we speak with them. We say, we think it would be good if you speak to some of our therapists, some of our social workers. If you're part of our psychosocial program, maybe for you, you can join our women's empowerment group. Maybe your children want to be part of our youth and children program. Maybe your husband wants to be part of our conflict mediation or citizen diplomacy programs. But so we're hearing that maybe part of the problems here is that you don't know how to afford a life for your family. Maybe you're feeling bad about yourself. Your self-confidence has gone down. Let's see if we can't network for you. But in the meantime, we have a center, and we have some trees, and we have some landscaping that needs to be done. What if you come and work with us this week? I know it's nothing in comparison to what you made in Jerusalem, but it is something. And maybe while you're here, we can see who's looking for someone to work for them and maybe a job. And so he came for the first week, and then while he was here, we were able to network with one of the monasteries, and now he's a full-time worker there. It's not the same salary he was getting in Jerusalem, but it's something. And it's something that allows him to go home to provide for his family, maybe not in the same way, but still provide, and also have his dignity intact, right? His children were part of our children program, then they became part of our youth program. His woman is still part of our women empowerment program. We have a women's group that comes every Thursday. She's still part of that, right? And so we see this transformation. It is important. It's not for us to decide the outcome. Maybe she wants to leave him. That's her right. That's her choice. Maybe she wants to stay with him. That's also her right and her choice. It's not for us as mediators to judge the outcomes or the interests or the desires, but it is for us to facilitate the conversation, to make sure that both parties are protected, to bring out the interests and the needs as we're able to, and to make sure that all parties have the agency to decide what they wish or what they desire and how their interests and needs are met and whether they are. And I think that can be very difficult for people because they may say, well, no, that's not what should happen. She should leave him, right? And if that's what she desires, then that's what we'll try and facilitate and work towards. But if it isn't for us to impose our agendas, because it's not my life. It's her life and it's his life. And they're the only ones who should have the right to choose how they live that life. And so that's the same. I'm changing a little bit towards Palestine and Israel, the greatest thing we say is don't impose solutions on us, right? I think we want your help, and this is globally, this is also to US Americans and Christian Americans specifically. We want your help in ending the violence and affording us protection. But let us choose our solutions. Let us come to the table as equal partners one day, not as occupied and occupier. Let us come to the table as equal partners and be able to decide on a viable win-win future for all of us.
Yeah. Wow. I'm curious how you see the differences in how you would approach a conflict, maybe one like you just described, with the culture, Palestinian culture in this context versus maybe a Western American context.
Yeah.
How those would be different.
Thank you, and I think we have had some conflicts where one partner has been international, or one party has been international and the other one Palestinian, or both parties were international. I think there are a few important differences. The first is culture and language. In Palestinian culture, sometimes we circle around the topic. You know, we focus on what we call saving the water, which is saving the face of the person. And that means understanding that it doesn't matter what actions led us here, that we recognize two individuals whose identities and lives are more expansive than this singular event. I may have committed the worst and most awful, atrocious act against a person, but I might still have a mother and father that love me at home. And so how can I be this monster to this one group while I can also be this loved child to this other group, right? And so we do not wish to diminish the identity of anyone. We wish to create a separation between persons and their actions, recognizing the transformative ability and potential that we each have. And I think this is something, since, you know, we are also both Christians, this is something that we learned from Jesus, right? Jesus was in this land, and he was walking in Jericho, and he sees this short man. Not that there's anything wrong with short people on this tree. Zacchaeus, I will have dinner at your house tonight. Right? This isn't a literal, you can read the Bible, you can see what it literally says, what the words are. And Jesus goes to his house, this man who was hated by people, who seemed to be stealing from people, and was stealing their riches and their hard-earned money, right? Today's leaders might have said, hey, let's all attack the tree and take down Zacchaeus. But Jesus went to his house. And during the meal, after the meal, there was this transformation. And this person who, as far as we can tell, was living for the riches he could accumulate, decided to give back what he had stolen and give back 4 times as much as he had taken. Right? Is it better to topple and kill these peoples or to transform them? Because there's also a good that comes with this transformation. And we see this good all the time. We have people who volunteer after conflict mediation. We see people who give back. We see people who've hurt other families who decide we must restore the balance by making sure that we return them to the state that they were at before we hurt them, and even lift them a bit higher if we're able to.
Wow.
But in our society, it is up to the person who has committed the wrong in healthy and most effective conflict transformation mediation in the gathering, not the shell diplomacy, in the gathering, to recognize their own aggression and violence. Because that is the strongest and most effective way to save their face and save the water of their face. Right? When we talk about the states, born again Christians, this I am a sinner and I have been reborn. It is not about us not committing sin, it is about recognition and accountability. yes, I have done this, but I'm committing myself to something else. I'm committing myself to good, committing myself to justice, to a positive peace. With some of our Western partners or international partners, it depends on the culture that they come from. We find a lot of Western Europeans, we have to pinpoint the dot. If we try and dance around the topic, we're either going to be accused of neglecting their needs and their pain or something else. And so it's a very different relationship and communication style that is employed in these conversations. And when it's a mixed group, we have to kind of make both sides aware. Explain that in this culture you can do this, in that culture you can do that, without meaning to offend the other side. And then they can have some cultural sensitivity and awareness that comes into the meeting that facilitates the conversation, moves it in a healthy direction. I think it's also important, the legal aspect of this. Different communities, different persons will have different rights. And part of what we try and do is make sure that they're aware of their rights. We believe conflict mediation to be more effective than going to court and fighting through the judicial law or through the legislative law that is available. But we also have Palestinians with different citizenship or lack of. Palestinian with West Bank, Palestinian citizenship, a Jerusalemite with only a temporary or permanent ID who's considered an immigrant under Israeli law and Jordanian, or a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship. And each one of them has a different set of laws that they can utilize. And it's important to us, even though we believe that this is the more effective and better way of doing things, that they're also aware of what they could do. And so we'll oftentimes have at least one lawyer who's part of this mediating staff or a mediating group who can also speak to what rights and privileges they may have. So you can see it depends on who you're working with, not just with Palestinians, but intra-Palestinian groups, but also with internationals. Some internationals may have the full right to be here. Some internationals that want the Israeli authorities to know that they're spending the majority of their time in the West Bank or in these communities. They have the right to call upon the Israeli police, which of course for Palestinians is not an easy thing. Palestinian police are largely seen as aggressors along with the Israeli military and Israeli Navy, and they have the right to call upon these bodies. They also have the right to call on their consulates and embassies, and then they're also afforded different privileges and rights and protections through them, which the Palestinians largely are not. And so it's important for us, again, when we're having these conversations, to explain and to try and make sure that we understand what they're trying to get out of this. Are you looking for conflict mediation, transformation, reconciliation? Or maybe are you looking for your economic benefit and interest? Maybe the legal route is better to serve these interests than conflict, reconciliation, transformation, mediation, depending on how it plays out is.
Yeah. It's good stuff. I would love to also ask you, sometimes it can be super helpful to hear what not to do. I found anyway.
Yeah.
And any stories you want to tell are probably great. I'm curious whether it's in the Palestinian context of conflict, mediation, transformation, from your experience, or principles you've learned, what you would say, like, don't do this or this or this, if you have anything, which can just be helpful to bring into focus and highlight really what you do want to do by saying really what not to do.
And this is in relation to conflict mediation.
Yeah.
Okay, so first we have to start with the event. And this can be very difficult, don't escalate. Right, I think when something happens, it's always great to have some space from the actual event, from the violence. As soon as one side begins to escalate, now we're in this cyclone or tornado, and it's only going to get bigger the more time that we have. And the bigger it gets, the more work we have to do. And there is a point where it becomes so destructive that conflict mediation becomes much more difficult. For some, that is the point of murder and death. For others, it can be the murder of multiple people. For some, it can be the destruction of certain artifacts. For some, it can be certain things that are said. So try to keep the cyclone as small as possible. Try to limit the destructive power and the destruction that is committed. In terms of do's and don'ts, when we're talking about bringing the groups together, I think it's important to sit with ourselves and know what we want. What are we really expecting in this? It's important to set our expectations. I think because even if there is a positive outcome, if that positive outcome isn't as positive as we expected it to be, we can also leave with a bitter taste in our mouth. Don't assume. It's always great to ask questions. I think also be aware of how you ask the question, because there are some questions that are pointed, and there are some questions that are more curious than pointed. When I heard you say this, what did you mean by this? Versus, when you said this, did you mean that I'm a blah, 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 blah? Right? That can be a bit more pointed than the first one, which allows the other person to actually speak without being on the defensive. Yes, there are some facts. Yes, there are some events that have transpired. But the easiest way through this is to allow the other person to hold full accountability for what has transpired by having this open curiosity in the way that we communicate and question. There are some events that will speak for themselves. If you shot me with a gun, I think it doesn't matter what was behind that. That event speaks for itself, and the wound in my body, if you didn't miss, speaks for itself as well. When it comes to me reacting to a statement that you made, there's a little bit more room for open inquiry, for curiosity. And within that, there's also room for you to say, yeah, I shouldn't have said that. I'm very sorry. I did say that, but that's not what I mean today. And that's not what I should have said, right? Yeah. There's room for you to hold, and for myself to hold accountability. Learn about the custom that you're entering into. Part of our mediation style in Sulha, in Arab Palestinian tradition, there's an importance placed in coffee drinking.
I've heard a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I'm going to make you the aggressor, forgive me, and right here's the victim.
Right.
You do not get to just drink the coffee before the conversation has happened. And how they drink the coffee speaks volumes to what has transpired and to how they feel about this conflict transformation mediation. If they drink the coffee while it is hot, they are happy with the outcome. If they drink it after it's cooled down, the outcome is okay. If they drink it while it's cold, we accept the outcome, but there might still be a lot of things to talk about, or things that are going to come up. If they don't drink the coffee, we have a lot of work to do, and we have to brace ourselves because there might be an escalation of violence in just a minute.
Wow.
In just a moment.
Wow.
So, and this is, sometimes we have people who come here, and especially internationals who've been with us for years, and we may forget that they're internationals or that they're not used to all our customs. Mm-hmm. And they come to the house and they pass the coffee and they've already drank it. And and we haven't finished speaking, mm-hmm. right? So this is a very small thing. within the don'ts also is, I think, being able to stick somehow to a roadmap. Don't go out on your own path. Everything that needs to be said should be said, but once we come to the actual event, especially when there are surprises and shocks, the tendency is to bring our own shock and surprise. If it's important to the conversation and the discussion and the events and conflict that has transpired, yes, bring it up. But oftentimes what we see is it's completely and totally unrelated, and it may be A and B had a conflict, and B said something about A that A was not expecting, and so A says, what about you and C? What about when you did that with C? But C isn't part of this conflict, and they're not there, they're not present, they cannot speak on their behalf, which is also the other don't. As much as you can, don't speak for other people unless they've given you explicit permission to. We're sometimes very good, especially in the moment, to use everyone else's words, especially if their words as we understood them are quite condemning. And so within this, we focus on speaking for ourselves. And when we actually talk about conflict mediation and communication, especially with our children and our youth, we focus on using I statements. I was hurt versus you hurt me.
Okay.
Because the hurt is still there, but when I say you hurt me, I'm now placing you on the defensive and you are now unable to hear my hurt. It is up to you, and this is what we also work on, and this is hopefully part of this awareness and conscious building, is that when you hear that I am hurt, you should ask if I'm in conflict with you whether that hurt came from you. And you can speak to that hurt. I'm sorry you were hurt. That was not my intention. Or I'm sorry you were hurt. What I did was not right. Right? And 1,000 other possibilities. But when we are able to speak about us and use I statements, we have the greatest chance of being able to be heard. There is room, and that you part, the person who holds the action that has been enforced upon me or that I have suffered, that has to be recognized and that has to be held and they have to be accountable for it. But that can come after. It can come after I'm done speaking, or it can come towards the end of the conversation. But what we need to focus on right now is the hurt. And so when we talk about Gaza too, right, we can say Gazans are starving. They're being starved. Gazans are being killed. We can name things in all the ways that the Gazan people are feeling it, while understanding who's committing that injustice and oppression. But we must always make sure that the focus is on the person that is hurting. And I think this is so difficult when we talk about conversations, I don't want to feel like the bad guy every time we talk. Okay? By being able to speak about the consequence this action has on me, if I'm able to, without naming the person who has caused that consequence, hoping that they'll name themselves, I'm able to make sure that I am understood. And there is some true understanding that comes in when we speak in those terms. I'm really sorry. It really was not my intention to hurt you. It wasn't the right way to do things, but what I was really trying to do was defend myself. And I hurt you while doing it. I'm sorry. In very simplistic and simple terms. And I think that's the same as, I'm going to go back to the States, so I hope you'll forgive me for that. When we talk about the police in the US, there are those who support funding the police and expanding police forces. There are those who wish to defund the police. And then in between this, there's all of these conversations and this discourse about a good cop and a bad cop. And I think one of the important things for me as a mediator is that is all one side of this. The other side is, what are those who are afraid and who are hurting saying? Right? And are we able to recognize that the police officer puts on a uniform and takes on that temporary identity, while the person that is afraid has no uniform to take on or to take off? To bring it back to Palestine, that is to say that to be in the role of the occupier is a choice. To be occupied is a reality that is enforced upon us. We have no agency in that. Does that mean that we should kill our occupiers or imprison them for life? No. But it does mean we need to be able to find a way to work so that this person is not able to choose to be part of a system that allows them to commit violence against me. And in the same way, in the States, we should not have to rely on the morality of the individual wearing the police uniform as it relates to the protection, to the security, and to the safety that anyone feels within our communities. We either need strong structures so that it doesn't matter, they could be the worst person or the best person, they cannot abuse the power that they're given, or we need to release these structures. I don't want to say those are the only solutions, but those are two real solutions within this. And I think there are a lot of people who wear the uniform there or here who have the desire of protecting their loved ones. And that desire is very real. The only issue with it is that desire cannot hold room for the lived reality of those who suffer because of the uniforms. I intend to do good, and now you're telling me that I'm committing extreme harm? What are you talking about? And so part of this is by being able to make sure that we're always centering the voices and the experiences of the most vulnerable, of the most harmed, and of the most in danger. Recognizing that this is the way things are, but it's not the way things should be or have to be. Recognizing that at some level this is the chosen way of us as a people or of it as a system, and that there's a lot of room for us to transform these systems. Let us have peacekeepers in every community, right? If that's one of the essential jobs of police and of soldiers, peacekeeping, how can we transform that role beyond weapons, beyond violence? Yeah. And one of the answers becomes through deep community building, right? Let us be connected to the people we serve. Let us not be a feared face or a feared unit. Yeah. Okay. The last thing maybe connected to this. We talk a lot about community responsibility here, collective responsibility. We also believe that this is something that Jesus taught us. Jesus isn't the only teacher, but it is one of our deepest and most meaningful teachers that we hold on to, and the teachings as well. There's the story of the layman who's being carried by people. They try and get into the house where Jesus is. It's overcrowded. They go to the roof. We can make every part of this symbolic. They take the tiles off of the roof, right? They're putting in this work to lay this person down in front of Jesus. And Jesus says something different here than Jesus has in other situations, such as the woman who touches his garment. He says to the woman, "You are healed because of your faith." Here he says, "You are healed because of their faith." Wow. And so there is this idea or understanding, this teaching that we have learned and that we try to implement and incorporate into our own work and that is that we are responsible for each other, and beyond that responsibility, that we do have the power to influence each other's lives for the better. We do not know, the scripture does not tell us whether that layman had faith in Jesus, or whether it was the people carrying that layman. And in the same way, there are many of us who are lost. There are many of us who are pessimistic. There are many of us who maybe can't see the light or wish not to because of the hurt that they've endured. We as a community, we have power to hold that light for them, to share that light, to carry them. And Jesus did not call upon us to be with like-minded people only, to be with those who see the light in the same way that we do or see no light. Jesus calls upon us to be in fellowship with each other. And that takes real and true community responsibility. Who fed the people with the loaves and the fish? Right? It does not matter the resources that we have as much as what we do with those resources. And maybe I said that was the last part, but
Very good.
we're all learning, right?
Yeah.
I think the last part is we try to take some of the teachings and the words in the Bible seriously. When we talk about this breath of life and the image of God, which we each represent, we see that as a call to recognize it within each other and to make sure that each image is able to live and lead a life of dignity. But beyond this, we also learn about free will. And so, who is God in all of this? And what is God? Dear God and the genocide of Gaza, liberate Palestinians and Israelis from injustice, from structural violence. These prayers are really needed and they're so important. And they are incomplete without placing our free will into action alongside them. Recognizing that a lot of what we are suffering is man-made, and God can give us the guidance. God, if God chose, could intervene and end it all in a positive and negative way, right, as God chooses. But God also gives us the opportunity to work together and do it ourselves. I believe it is no joke, this free will that we're given. Instead, it's a question of what are we going to do with it? Will we continue to commit ourselves, our time, and our resources for peace building, for justice building, for positive peace, for connecting with each other? Or will we choose to ignore it all and live in our own silos? Me as the only creation, instead of me as part of God's creation, as one image out of 8 billion images at the moment on this earth, who each deserve to share in the goodness that God has created around us.
Amen.
Hey, so thanks for tuning in to another episode of Vengeance and Reconciliation. I hope it was insightful and inspiring for you. Like I said in the intro, I made this whole interview free and didn't decide to have you guys pay to watch it, the full thing on Patreon. However, you can still support me on Patreon if you would like to do that, which would be very helpful. Links below in the show notes for that and many other things. Please follow the show on whatever platform works best for you. Share it with your friends and drop a comment. If you have any questions or ideas, you can contact me through social media. Thanks, and I'll catch you next time.